Hmm. Let me know. You're ready.
Uh, Dr. Amna, we are on air.
Okay. Salam alaikum. This is Dr. Aminah Al-deen, and this show is Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV. And as usual, we have loads of things to talk about this evening. I have two guests. The first is Corey Saylor, who is the Director of Research and Advocacy at the Council on American-Islamic Relations, and he's also an expert on political communications. I'm going to test that tonight, by the way. And he also does things about media relations and anti Islam practices, which is another part of our conversation tonight. And since we're talking across the United States, that becomes extremely important because as Muslims and others read the news, it's not just about Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's about things happening across the United States, whether they're perpetrated by Muslims themselves or people born into Muslim cultures or the radical right or the hyper radical left. You know, both of them spew out stuff that makes no sense. So I'm going to first welcome you. And I would like for you to begin by telling us a little bit about CARE.
Sure. And first of all, thank you very much for giving us some time to be on the program this evening. CARE, Council on American-Islamic Relations, is the nation's largest Muslim civil liberties and advocacy group. We have chapters all across the country, and we've been in existence since 1994. So our primary purpose is, if you want to sum it up easily, is to be the organization that stands up for people when they're being discriminated against.
Oh, no, I don't want you to sum it up. I want you to give us some details, dude.
All right, not a problem. So, if you put our work into a few different buckets. First of all, we're really privileged to have chapters, as I mentioned, all across the country. And they're really in touch with the local community. And they're often your first line of defense. So, for instance, if you live in California, we have 4 separate offices out there that serve the different community. And when someone feels like they're being discriminated against, they can call the CARE office. And what will happen is the attorneys and intake staff that we have on, within our offices will assess the case that you're presenting to them. And if we see a way for us to contribute and help the client out, we can either litigate or we can pursue advocacy tactics. And I'd love to talk about both as the conversation goes forward.
Okay, well,
but that's the reactive part of our work, dealing with the daily news cycle in the media. So as something is breaking, making sure that our community has some kind of voice in that conversation. I obviously recognize CARE doesn't speak for everyone, but we do try to make sure that there is a presence that has the Muslim community speaking rather than being spoken about. The other part that we work on in the department that I'm in, we do research and advocacy. So the research is important because it helps us understand the trends that are going on as it impacts Muslim communities across the United States. And then also the state of anti-Muslim sentiment and the groups that are pushing it across the country. That research, though, isn't just sort of stuck on a shelf for people to read the numbers. What we try to do is figure out patterns from that, and that becomes the advocacy side of things. How do you run longer-term proactive campaigns that can allow society to change so the types of cases that we're intaking today, hopefully down the road, become things that we don't ever have to deal with again. But overall, what I would really love to get us to is, think about if you have a focus group and you sit them down and you ask them, what do you think of when you hear the word Muslim, when you hear the word Islam? And I would argue to you that nowadays it's going to be a lot of word associations that none of us would be particularly happy about. I'd like to get us to a state where when somebody hears you're Muslim or when they see that you're Muslim, they think what we know to be accurate and true, right? Honest, hardworking, compassionate people. I think we can get there. I just think it's going to take time and effort, and that's what an organization like CARE exists for.
Well, I think, and this is critical talk, mind you. So I think that some Muslims are hardworking and all of those things, but certainly not all, as evidenced by bringing, I don't want to say Muslim, well, I'll say Muslim majority state antagonisms with them into this country. They also bring particular notions of femininity and what one can do when, a wife is acting out of that cultural paradigm of what's happening. I mean, we've had husbands murdering wives, and then some of them, I don't know if it's all of them, have then committed suicide, which means there's no justice. How do we handle it when there's no justice?
Well, there's a few things to respond to in what you were just saying. And the first one that I want to think about a little bit is, and you're right, there are always within any community, name your belief or lack thereof. Some of them are going to be great, upstanding people, and some of them are not. However, what I'm trying to get us toward is the general viewpoint that Islam as a religion, Muslims as those people who adhere to that religion, hold those values that I was just talking about as high ideals. And the best among us, of course, will obviously live them. There's no way that everyone is going to be that way. Again, that doesn't matter what your ideology or lack thereof. I think, to your other point about the opportunity that we get, really, from Muslims coming to this country from every part of the world, is that you get to test ideas. So, for instance, when I converted way back in hollowed history, I converted either 89, 90, 91. We weren't keeping track at the time, unfortunately. But when I first became Muslim, just the act of going out and voting was something that people argued frequently was haram, and that participating in the system here in the United States was not appropriate because it's not a Muslim majority country. And I think those views, do they still exist in some parts of the community? Yes, absolutely. And if someone holds those views, my advice is, just go out and do good in the community you live in. I don't care what it is that you're doing. Just, be a benefit to humanity. But we've been able to see the understanding of Islam in this country evolve because, just within reach of my house, I can go to a mosque that's predominantly Afghan. I can go to an African-American mosque. I can go to a mosque that's predominantly foreign service individuals from overseas. I can go to a mosque that's predominantly Pakistani. You get all of that. And in none of them do you find just one community anymore. It might have been that way 20 years ago. Now, when I walk into, say, Masjid Muhammad in Washington, D.C., it is a mix of people. And I think that is great. I think that makes us strong. And the debates can be really tough at times, as you just pointed out, because they're very serious issues. But ultimately, over the long term, particularly now, when we as a community are not under the type of siege that we've often seen in the last couple of decades, where we have a chance to sort of really reflect and build who we want to be, rather than being told who we want to be by the national security apparatus.
But don't you think that there is a difference in positionality between those of us who transitioned to Islam because it stood for justice, because it stood for truth. And those for whom, it's another article of clothing, and they just want a peaceful life and may never stand for justice. How do you invoke conversation?
I think back to what I was pointing out earlier. From all segments of our community, we have people who are exactly as you described, who stand for justice. One of my greatest measures for justice is actually the woman I'm married to, which, I'll be very honest, meeting her was what started me down the path to converting to Islam. When I was 19, by the way, so that was like a couple of years ago. But she's from Afghanistan. And she was 10 when the Soviet Union invaded our country. And she came here, and they were hailed as heroes because they were fighting communism. She was 10 years old. She was throwing rocks at Soviet soldiers. Now today, I'm often struck when I'm sitting listening to the news, whenever I hear her do something like, oh, it's just like back home, which, unfortunately happened a lot, say, during the Trump presidency. That to me is a measure, because that's her speaking out in her mind the difference between justice that we seek to see as, a people driven by our faith, and, other injustices that some other folks want to adhere to. But I would say that we have people who stand up for justice from all segments of our community, and also people who stand up for justice who may not be Muslim but are just committed to the success of our community. CARE's first Jewish executive director in Philadelphia just retired, so he's top of mind for me right now. But we have plenty of staff who are not of the Muslim faith, but they care about that commitment to justice, and I'm all for welcoming all of them.
Yeah, I've just often wondered, because people shy away from anti-racism conviviums and inside the community and other kinds of things, how do we ever get to be a healthy community?
Well, that's where you get to the news of the day, right? And what you led in with, the discussion about what we saw transpiring in New Mexico. And I want to we're a legal organization right now. The authorities have not yet said what the man's motive was. Reporting alleges that it was an anti-Shia motivation. And regardless, to me, right, that's New Mexico, that's today. We, I think, as a community, just have to upfront recognize that anti-Shia racism bias has existed within the Muslim community in the United States, and for a very long time outside the United States, centuries. Yeah. So New Mexico is simply the manifestation of something that's been going on for a long time. And it's very important for us to really sort of stop and think. And I don't mean that in a performative, let's all post something on our social media about how horrible it is. But I mean, really stop and think about how it is that we want to approach the problem. And to me, Imam Khalid Latif summed up my concerns very well in a Facebook post earlier today. He was talking about, in his role as imam at New York University, there was a young man who was Shia who was afraid to walk into their mosque because of things that had happened to him overseas before he came to the United States. And they were very fortunate that they had a Shia-trained imam in the mosque who went and talked to the young man and convinced him that this was a place where he was going to be safe and where he was going to be welcomed. Like, that blows my mind. We can't have that in our country. How do we solve that? It's unfortunately a discussion that is not complete yet. Certainly, I point to groups like Muslim Anti-Racism Coalition, led by very important Marguerite Hill, among others. In my introduction, I talked about CARE. Our primary work is defending the community from external discrimination. That doesn't mean we ignore other types of discrimination, but Marguerite and Muslim Arc specialize in it. And as I've talked about that evolution I've seen in the community over the several decades that I've been Muslim, one of those things that I've really enjoyed seeing is that we have specialized organizations now who are subject matter experts. And it's good to be able to go, hey, Margaret, you give us the best advice you can give us on how we as CARE can handle it, among other groups that advise us. And equally, when she has somebody who's being discriminated against and needs legal or advocacy services, she can point them toward us. I think that is one of the most incredibly healthy dynamics that we can have among our institutions that recognize, or excuse me, that represent Muslims.
Okay, that was wonderfully said. Let us take a minute or two break, and I want to come back and talk a little bit about priorities and language. And since you're the communications guy, language is your forte. This is Dr. Aminah Al-deen for Critical Talk and Muslim Network TV. I'll be right back. This is Dr. Aminah Al-deen with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV. And I'm talking this evening with Corey Saylor of CARE, who is not only their media go-to person, he's also the person that talks about community relations, which is critical for our discussion this evening. So I want to go back to priorities. One of the things that I have noticed is that everything is a priority. And I'm saying that couldn't be right. A woman who someone makes fun of her with a headscarf on is not as important as a woman who is murdered, is not as important as someone whose job is threatened by this, or a mosque that is vandalized. How does CARE line things up with regard to priorities?
That's a really important question, and there's a few layers to it. I mentioned in the first segment that our chapters are the on-the-ground first line of defense that many folks can turn to. And so it's important for them to be able to react very quickly when someone gets discriminated against, no matter what that happens to be. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, just in the last year we have full data for 2021, we had 6,720 total complaints come into the organization, which I think any viewer of the show is going to recognize that's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So what you're going to be looking for are cases where you can actually do something with litigation, if not where you can actually do something for the client through advocacy. So for instance, I just had a case come in the other day where someone was accosted in the street. And by the time the case came to me, the folks already had a restraining order against the people who accosted them. So there's not too much more I can do there. But on the other hand, I had a case come in where a 13-year-old boy was beaten up by a number of people who had been calling him names for months, based on his country of origin. He's from Syria. And when they beat him up, they videotaped it so they could play it back for entertainment later.
Oh, overs.
In that instance, we were able to intervene with the police and talk to the police, who were already going to charge the attackers, but information that we gave them led to additional charges. So those are a couple of assessments. But I do also want to talk about, those are the rapid response things we need to deal with because they're happening in the here and now. On the other hand, we have to think about the environment in which our community is operating and how we can prioritize our success in that environment. I'll just give you a really quick example. Midterm election is coming up. As it stands right now, most observers who are experts expect that the House will become Republican controlled, and the Senate just recently became a toss-up. What that means is we have to think about, while none of the types of legislation that we're most interested in are likely going to move as a dysfunctional Congress becomes even more dysfunctional, and we go into the 2023 election season, which those of you who lived through the last couple of election seasons can anticipate will likely cause social unrest and violence and other types of chaos in our society. So what can we be doing to prep our community for that, to help make sure that our community is safe and secure? So there are programs that we're running like that. For instance, there's one entity within the government that will give a one-time $150,000 grant to any place of worship to help ensure that their security measures are up to date. And we're going to
Let me interrupt you to bring on Attorney Mitchell. And Attorney Mitchell is the ED of CIOGC in Chicago, which is like the umbrella for a number of Muslim organizations and masajid, and also an attorney there in Chicago. Attorney Mitchell, welcome, first of all. And we have been just going around talking in general about some of the issues, and Corey was kind enough to give us like an overview of what CARE does and what CARE doesn't do. So right now we're looking at how do you prioritize? What is the thing you're going to move on and put your resources toward? Because there are all kinds of cases. And Muslims, especially those who come from other countries, don't have this opportunity. So it's a new opportunity. So, it's like somebody called me a name, I'm going to sue. Everything becomes an opportunity to get on the bandwagon.
Well, first, good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to join this important topic. At this particular point in time, in beginning to address the questions that you're saying, I think I would like to share the point of view from, let's say, from the individual masjid. As the executive director of basically a federation of mosque schools here in Illinois, northeastern Illinois, there is anxiety created like this with the situation that we witnessed in Albuquerque, and in terms of preparing that Corey mentioned about the grants, those are federal grants through FEMA, and how we respond to do is help our members raise their awareness of these grants, assist them in ways that we can to help them put in the applications. But that's one level. It's in terms of more as a defensive end. So what else can be done on a, let's say, a community basis as a masjid, as a community of believers? What can be done? And it really goes to how we can become more involved in in policies that begin to combat religious hate and intolerance, how we will join with other civic partners in standing against, opposing this kind of behavior. I mean, it is common, well, let's say it's anecdotal knowledge that violent speech usually leads to violent acts. It's almost like it is its precursor. And it is important for us as Muslims in the Muslim community, when this occurs, to speak out against it, more than just giving, let's say, writing letters of condemnation. That's becoming in my mind, a worn out process. But it really is how are we going to engage our elected officials to challenge them to come up with policies that aggressively address this kind of violent speech, these kind of violent acts. And in my mind, it's some of these perpetrators, they come off as someone with psychological problems, but nonetheless, you see the facts that lead up, or the circumstances that leads up to their actions. They were engaged and took in all this hateful speech, and it came to a point where they acted on what they're hearing. So these are definite challenges, but I think, as I say, I think the real challenge for us as Muslims is how we're going to be proactive. It's, like I said, it's more than setting up the masjid as a fortress. It's more about how are we going to engage our neighbors to understand who we are, what we believe, what we stand for, and join us in fighting this kind of hate, regardless of whether it's racial, religious, or ethnic.
But you have 400 years of American history, going back to a little bit before Benjamin Franklin, where in Protestant churches, who we are and what we stand for is being taught. And it's being taught to young Christians as children, and they grow up with them. And if you ask them what was Islam, they tell you, well, it's the worship of the devil, with their bogus prophet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that trying to teach people just who we are also involves the whole smorgasbord of who we are. You know what I'm saying? All Muslims aren't peaceful. Muslims, to be able to be American, quote unquote, will buy into, every Muslim country that's trying to save itself, like Iraq, is bad because America says it is. I mean, how do we begin to draw lines about what is the truth of something?
I think there's a couple of things there, if I could. On the first hand, Frederick Douglass, agitate, agitate, agitate. We have to be loud. We have to stand up. We cannot allow ourselves as a community to be bullied, right? We can't sit in the masjid, as was very wisely said, and wait for things to happen. We have to be out and engaged in the community. So let's not be an easy target. Let's make noise, but let's be out in the community. But part two of that is it's important for us as a community, as a Muslim community, to engage in non-traditional Muslim issues. If we want to be a benefit to humanity and avert harm from humanity, that means humanity, right? Not just Islam. So one example I'd love to give you very quickly, Linda Sarsour really pioneered this when she made the jump from working on Muslim community issues to working on stop and frisk in New York, which was the practice of police of stopping predominantly minority African-American young men and checking them without any real cause. And she became a leader on that issue. And that helped her to be seen as a leader for justice and not just a leader in the Muslim community. And that is 100% the key.
Yeah, but the problem is there's one Linda Sarsour. You know what I'm saying? And when what Linda does goes off the radar, there are not a bunch of people keeping the ideas and the forcefulness back on the radar.
You know, Dr. Al-deen, that there's no silver bullet. There's not one pill that's going to solve all this. I mean, your question really leads us into some of the challenges that we face. But everybody, we all have the capacity to be a Linda Zarzur. We can lead challenges, as Corey said, to be an agitator for justice wherever we are, because it's like really we're not going to cause a wholesale turnover of attitudes of as you say, values and attitudes that have been ingrained in someone since childbirth. But there are those that will listen, that will change, and we have to work till we reach, and for the lack of a better word, the critical mass, where that is the dominant point of view, that there is a place for all of us in this country to live, to enjoy the benefits and rights it has, and also assume the responsibilities. And I think one of those responsibilities is what we're talking about tonight, to assume the responsibility to be civically engaged, to demand policies that, as Corey said, not just extend to, fighting the travel ban, but to fight to stand up for any policy that really marginalize or victimize any segment of our society. Then we're going to really be viewed as a part of the fabric, as opposed to being separate.
And I would just respectfully say that there is only one Linda herself, but there are a lot of people I've had the privilege to meet who are not with her sort of level of visibility, but doing amazing work. And what comes to mind immediately, Tanisa Islam in South Dakota. She is an amazing activist, and I think there's like one Muslim in South Dakota, right? But her ability to get things done, outstanding. And there are lots of people like that across the country, and I wish that they had more visibility, because I think people would really find that inspiring. The people who
how do you get
us,
that visibility?
well, let me just finish that sentence if I could. The people who hate us want us to buy into their narrative that that we're defeated and that we're just going to be knocked down and we should just give up. And I think by lifting up people like Tanisa, like Linda, like Zahra Bilu out in California, we combat that in the minds of our own community. How do we lift them up? Part of my job is media, and I am more than happy to, when I find people, teach them how to get the media to pay attention to the work they're doing. And if the media won't, social media has been a gift on that front. You don't always have to wait to the media to come to you. If you put yourself out into the universe on social media, the people that are like you, that you seek to draw to you, will come.
Agreed.
That's true. And I want to go back to language. And Abdullah, we mentioned it before the break, and Abdullah mentioned it again. And we're using some really tired, worn out phrases. We condemn. What does that mean? Does it mean you're going to go back to the community and hold community meetings on what the issues are? Or does it just become we roll out those phrases?
You know, if we cry wolf too many times, no one's going to believe you. I mean, I think it is important, though, in terms of repetition and on one level, to make it clear what our position is, because to the extent that we remain silent, someone is going to begin to define what we believe and what we should do.
Yep.
But a condemnation in and of itself is insufficient. It must be coupled with some demonstrative action that we're taking that is visible, that can gain attention, that shows how we really reflect what we say we believe. And to the extent that that is, we move out of our comfort zone beyond just alliances with other Muslims, but with other like-minded, civically engaged individuals, the narrative will change. I mean, we're not, as African Americans, we're still fighting that, but it's a question of not giving up. When you get weary, you may have to rest a moment, but we cannot give up the fight. And it's the same situation for Muslims. And the more that we can begin to define our place as in support of and advocate for all marginalized people, then that becomes the group that we are associated with. That will help define what we really believe and what we are about. And those things, with time, will bring the change that we definitely seek at this moment.
Let me not quite switch gears, but let me focus in. These murders in Albuquerque, first they hit the news, and everybody was kind of sure that it was some right-wing group that was picking off Muslim men of a particular ethnicity, etc., and probably around a particular masjid. Now, what has happened is we found out that the man who at least killed 2 people was himself of a Muslim culture. The news media has glammed on to both issues of immigrants, but also issues of Sunni divide. Please speak to that.
Well, let's go back to the first segment a little bit. Just to restate, the authorities have not said that. Those are certainly the 2 dominant narratives in the media, but we just want to be very clear that that is not what has come out from the folks who arrested this gentleman. That said, it does highlight the conversation about the Shia-Sunni divide. It does highlight a divide that has existed within the American Muslim community for decades and within the wider Muslim community for generations, centuries. I don't think we're going to solve it in the next few days. I do think that as a community, it is important for us to have conversations about it and reflect upon what it means for us. And to me, the first priority there is to make sure, going back to the story I told about the young man who was afraid to walk into a mosque in New York because he was Shia and he was afraid about how the Sunnis there would look at him. That just cannot happen. We as leaders within our community have to make sure, first and foremost, that our mosques are seen as places where people with differing views can come and all be treated equal and free to worship the way they understand their relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the immigrant side of it, same kinds of issues exist. You have folks that are new to the country and are learning these ways. They bring knowledge and wisdom with them. Those of us who have been here for our entire lives also have knowledge and wisdom. And I think that the interactions of those 2 communities ultimately strengthens our faith here. There are going to be bad actors within all of these different groups. We as a faith face the challenge in this country that many people looking at us do not give us the benefit of the doubt, right? They immediately go to the stereotypes they've been subjected to going back once again decades, right? The Iranian Revolution is where really the fear mongering about Islam started. So it's not like it got started anytime in the last couple of decades. I, however, do always remain optimistic that because we have institutions that are becoming more professional and more specialized and more visible, that we will reach that tipping point where when someone hears that you are Muslim or that you are Islam, they have those positive associations: honest, hardworking, compassionate. And there will be a day when these things that you and I deal with, such as people going, "Oh, you're Muslim, you must be," insert whatever stereotype you want, that those are no longer one of the things that people have to deal with.
Wait a minute, I'm going to hold you up. I'm going to take a break and we're going to come back and let Attorney Mitchell answer the same question so he can have a full thing and I don't have to take a break in the middle of it. This is Dr. Aminah Al-deen with Critical Talk on Muslim Network TV, and we will be right back. Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Aminah Al-deen on Critical Talk, and I am having a wonderful conversation with, oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It won't stop. With Corey Saylor from CARE. He does their communications, their media relations, and with the ED of CIOGC. And we're talking about a lot of things about, really it's all about how the community can become healthier. Various aspects. And, I'm looking at I want to go back to Attorney Mitchell and have him respond to the question. Don't you dare.
It is the role. It's been the job of those that have opposed Islam and Muslims to find their negative talking points and to exaggerate those points to, in essence, influence opinion. So that is going to be a challenge with us under any circumstances. And as we look at the situation in Albuquerque, and even as we recall that we took on to how to respond to this, and with the inferences that are implicit and sometimes expressed. And I think we have to go to our root beliefs fundamentally, regardless if it was done by any person, to the extent that it is hate-based, it's that violates the sanctity of life. We have to speak out against it. It is not for us to explain the actions of any person who chooses to do evil. It is our role to explain what our beliefs are, what our principles are, and how we follow them. Because there's no way, it's just like even after 9/11, we as a community, we became very defensive. We in essence, tried to paint the image of a lamb docile, accepting anything. Islam means peace. But the reality of it is because we felt that we accepted the narrative that, oh, all Muslims are terrorists, and we're trying to prove, no, we're not that. That's not who we are. We're going to be able to prove who we are by the things that we do. And as I've said, it's about being proactive. It's about being engaged. And these are our actions will be what challenges the statements that are made against us as a religion.
Okay, you all have given me some relief in the sense that people are, at least you two, are thinking about how to change the narrative. And changing the narrative becomes critical. We seem to have somewhere out there, there's a pattern that we've decided will work for us because it worked for another religious group, not looking at the differences. There also seems to be a misunderstanding of our Constitution and the rights that people have and who the Constitution was written for. It certainly wasn't written for the three of us sitting here, and how do we reconcile that with our wants and desires? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, there are statutes on the books that have been there for centuries against women covering their heads in public schools, for example. Even though, of course, it was aimed at nuns, right? And other religious women, it's still on the books. There were things about religious symbolism. Do we really want to turn this country, to wipe away the secular part and just keep the religious part? Because we're not going to win that fight, right? As Muslims jump on the bandwagon, we must have religion in schools. Really? Do you know which religion it's going to be?
You
can talk back to me.
The real challenge in here is it is fighting for those rights that were promised in the documents that you just referred to that didn't have us in mind. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, that has to be the premise from which we operate and to guide the actions that we're looking for. Currently, we're seeing the narrative in this country being defined in a Christian / maybe Christian Judeo image, but more Christian image, that this is what it means to be American. Mm-hmm. Too often in our we can see among marginalized groups not fully embracing, let's say, the American ideals. The reality of it is the sacrifice that many of us, particularly African Americans, have contributed. That flag is our flag. It is not the flag of the January 6th rioters. That is
it's not my flag, Mitchell. It's not my flag.
No, we're talking about in terms of the principles here for this particular country. Now, once again, we all have expressions. I mean, you have people that have lived here from Italy, from Ireland for generations. But yet, yes, they do take pride in their ethnic heritage. Mm-hmm. There is no problem having pride in one's ethnic heritage and in guiding, let's say, your culture and your practices in there. Well, what we're talking about is fundamentally the principles that are going to govern this particular the United States, and to the extent that those are embodied in documents such as the Constitution or the American flag, that is we claim much right to those documents and that flag as anyone else. Let me finish this last point. Until the extent that we co-opt and let that be co-opt by another group, then they, just by the history of this country, it says, oh, they have the flag, so they're right. No, I don't believe that should be the narrative or the position that we take.
Corey mentioned earlier, just along those lines, how do we keep where our obedience and worship is as Christian language invades Muslim language, as our need to be seen is patterned after something that is not us, and many, not all, of course, many are scared to death of upsetting the wagon because they don't want to be deported.
You know, I'll just very quickly, because I'd love to hear Abdullah's answer to it, that question. But go back to the agitate. Right? We as leaders, it's important that we listen to the people who are our constituencies. It's also important that we lead our constituencies. And one of the ways we do that is by constantly standing up and not accepting others defining us. So I often think the words jihad, Sharia, I think they've been completely co-opted from us at this point.
I swear.
We need to push back and fight against that.
Mm.
One of my most personally important examples is when Oklahoma passed a law specifically targeting Islam. CAIR was very quick to sue them on the grounds that it specifically targeted Islam. And I remember fielding dozens of phone calls from community members who were like, don't rock the boat, don't worry about it, this will just pass. And it was like, no, we can't in this particular moment. Right? I'd love to listen to you and hear what you have to say. But in this case, if we do not dig our heels in and push back, then we will just be seen as the punching bag they want us to be. So I appreciate you letting me get that answer in. But Abdullah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Abdullah?
Well, there's not a lot that I would add more. I think Corey he summed it up well, because it's, how do we define the conflict? Okay, if we define the conflict of it's Muslim versus Christian, or Muslim versus Jew, or whatever the subgroup would be, then we politicized it along the lines that we will not prevail. The reality of it is, in terms of this cultural fight that we're all engaged in this country, to define what it means to be a U.S. citizen. It is our job to make sure that definition includes our values, our points of view. That's what's critical. And right now, what the real challenge is, we see it from pundits, we see it from certain political leaders trying to define what it means to be American in terms of a Christian white model that we have to resist. Once again, it is not our job, as I see it, to win every battle. That's not our job. Is to stay engaged in this struggle to define what it means to be a citizen of this country, and a definition that is inclusive, not restrictive, that doesn't define it based on the color of your skin or your ethnic heritage. That's the challenge that we as Muslims face. And it's not just about, hey, let's get the Muslims in and don't worry after that, because it's an ongoing struggle that we need allies, and we only get allies until the extent we have a common values that we search for, and that's what we were spoken about this evening.
Well, I think you all have given me a lot to think about. Sounds like I need to have a seminar and invite Corey and Abdullah, and we hammer out some issues. Let me give each of you a moment to end our conversation tonight before we close.
I'm ready.
You go right ahead, please. I had the whole first segment to myself. I really, I want to make sure that your thoughts are first.
I would like to close with this. There are varying views in the Muslim community how we should be engaged. There are those that will refuse to participate in any form of politics, that refuse to vote. Nonetheless, despite all these countervailing views, the reality is we always find a way that we're going to contribute to the narrative that we've talked about. From my personal point of view, it does mean being engaged in these elections to select who you want to represent you. It is not it's not something that we can sit at the sidelines, because those are the people that you see already in public office that are developing these anti-Sharia laws that are coming up the restrictions directed at Muslims. And so if you don't put people with policymakers that are whose motto or their platform is to be inclusive, then we're in essence opening ourselves to be subjected to whatever comes down the path. So I'm not saying that this is the once again, this is not the silver bullet, this answer to all the problems that we're faced. But nonetheless, this is what I would leave with your audience as their obligation to definitely become involved, and even in this process where policies are formulated that govern and rule our country.
Okay, Corey. Last minute.
We have to have the difficult conversations internally and externally. Internally, we already talked about the anti-Shia hate that manifested in New Mexico that's been around for a while. It's time for us as a community to just face it and have that conversation. Similarly, there are certain segments of our community that discriminate against Muslims for being African American. That conversation has to be had. That's what Muslim ARC is all about, by the way, right? That's the work that Marguerite started with. Have that conversation, have the hard one. Similarly, externally, we can't be in our comfort zone of just talking among ourselves and hanging out in the mosque. You've got to go out and you've got to talk to people who may not see the world the way you do, because ultimately those are the folks that we have to move so that we get to that point where the stereotypes targeting our community go away. You've got to be willing to go beyond your comfort zone, talk to people that you think might disagree with you, and be you and stand up and be proud.
I want to thank both of you.
Corey, it's going to be a great cookball. We need you to give it.
I can't thank both of you enough for joining me on this kind of wide-ranging topic. It has been just great. And my producer is jumping up and down, so we have to go. This is Dr. Aminah Al-deen with Corey Saylor from CARE and attorney Abdullah Mitchell from CIOGC. And they were just getting warmed up, so I got to come back. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. We enjoyed our time with you, and hopefully we gave value to your audience.
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.